look at quadratics and their graphs and focusing mainly on looking at the turning points and the roots. So we know that the turning point is when your gradient turns from a negative to a positive. So that is either directly at the bottom, which is called the minimum point of your graph, as long as it's a positive quadratic, or the maximum point, and that would be for a negative quadratic. I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. So we know that here is our turning point, and it's this coordinate at the bottom of your graph on this question. So therefore our coordinate would be -2, -1. It is then asked for the coordinates of the roots of the equation x squared plus 4x plus 3 is 0. So we know our roots, which are equal to 0, is when it crosses your x-axis. So we can highlight those two on the graph. It's asked for the coordinates, so therefore we would need to write that x is -1 when y is 0, and x is -3 when y is 0. In question 2, it's asked you to identify the values given that graph. So, because this is a positive quadratic, and we can tell that from the shape, and we've got a minimum point as our turning point, we know that our A has to be positive. It then asks us for the value of C. Well, we know if we looked at this equation here, and we put x as 0, which is our y-axis, then we would be left with y is equal to C. So we then need to have a look on our graph at where our graph crosses our y-axis. You can see that it crosses in the negative y part. So therefore we know that C would have to be negative. And finally, part C, it tells you that the solutions, well, we know our solutions are where it crosses our x-axis. That is when it's equal to 0. So you can see that 1 is going to be positive and 1 is negative. So our answer there would be C. In our third question, it's very similar. However, you'll notice that now we've actually got a maximum point and our quadratic graph is flipped over. That is what tells you that this is a negative quadratic. So therefore the value in front of the x squared, the quadratic part in our equation, has to be negative. In part B, if we do the same as before, where we put x is 0, so therefore we are looking at our y-axis, we would be left with y is equal to C if we substituted in that x is 0 into our equation. And here again, you can clearly see that it's crossing in the negative part of our graph. So therefore C is again negative. Now having a look for our solutions, so this is on our x-axis, you can see our graph passes in the negative quadrant again. So therefore we know that both have to be negative on this equation. Question 4. It's key to know the difference between part A and part B. Part A, it's told us that the x value has to equal to 0. So again, we are looking on our graph where x is 0, and that is your y-axis. And we've just got to work out where it crosses your y-axis. So we know that f of 0 has to equal to 2. In part B, it asks you to give the roots where the whole function, the f of x, is equal to 0. And this is actually where it crosses your x-axis, because this is saying that y is equal to 0. So that is our x-axis, and we read off where our graph intersects, and again there's going to be 2 points. So we know that our answer must be x is equal to -2 or x is equal to negative 1. Our fifth question wants you to give the coordinates of the turning point. So this is where your graph turns from a positive gradient to a negative, or the minimum or maximum point. So here it's going to be our maximum point, and we've gone across 1 and up 4. Just like before, f of x is equal to 0 is where it crosses our x-axis, because we know that y is 0 here, and we would get our two values for x, negative 1 and 3. And then for f of 0, so we know that x has been replaced with 0 here, which means it's where it crosses our y-axis, and we can clearly see it crosses at 3. So therefore f of 0 must equal to 3. So in question 6, it's asked us to select the two roots of this equation. We already know how to solve a quadratic, so they have already factorised it for you, and what you need to do now is make each bracket equal to 0. Because if you make the left-hand side bracket equal to 0, you know 0 times anything equals 0, and it solves it. If you make the right bracket equal to 0, you know that anything times 0 is also equal to 0, and it would solve this equation. So now we just need to rearrange to work out x. So we subtract 7 from both sides, then we divide by 3, and in this one we add 5 to both sides, then divide by 2. So then we would be left with these two answers, A and B. Our final question wants to know the coordinates of the turning point. Again, we're looking at our maximum point, which in this case would be 1, 4. And then it wants to know the coordinates of the roots where it's equal to 0. Again, you can see that this is where our y is equal to 0, which in other words is just our x-axis. And we can read off our two values there. So we know x is equal to negative 1 and x is equal to 3.